Good claim.
I didn't have enough space to explain how language creates the fear of
Good claims, though. You found them, you recognized them. I felt like you were right on about them. Yes. Okay, so if in your groups you were writing kind of the same things down, I commented on maybe one or two things that you could improve on each person's. So converse with the people in your group and see what I was saying about your answers, if they are here. And you can have some feedback. You can have some more feedback that way.
You have something in the no name of shame, but your name's on it.
Oh, that's because I couldn't tell what that was.
My name?
No, the assignment, because it didn't have a score. Oh, so just take it back.
I was about to say,
You must have thought you had to turn it in because.
or yeah, I must have the other sheet.
Yes, fine. Yes.
Wait, that's Dr.
What?
This is not mine. I'm just telling you. Take it.
Ah!
Okay, so take out your notes that you were taking last time about slave narratives.
I don't believe in slavery.
Oh, Zoe, I didn't see it yet. You'll have to give me a second when I have a chance and I will read it and talk to you about it. Okay, so we had, yes, we're done. Okay, yeah, that's actually a good question. So we're done with transcendentalism. We're done with Scarlet Letter now. So if you borrowed a copy of Scarlet Letter from me, I think you did. I don't think anyone else in this class did, but I need that back now. And then as far as the transcendentalism packets are concerned, you do not need to bring that to class anymore, but don't throw it away because on the AP test, you want to have as many sources as possible sort of in your back pocket that you could potentially reference on an argument essay. So, you know, hide it in your room somewhere. You don't have to look at it again for a very long time, but you're done. But don't throw it away. Lexi. Oh, goodbye. You're fine. Okay. So I'm going to just write down very quickly some of these characteristics from slave narratives so that we can have a conversation about them. So number one, they included a portrait. Number two, we've got Whitey's testimonial. Number three, we've got starts with I was born. Number four, kind of like selective parentage, not always clear who the parents were, and they kind of emphasize that fact, and often they are talking about potentially a white slave master as a father.
I feel like we should just throw that away. The marker.
Good point. Where to go? This one. All right. Number five, we get a description of a very cruel master and always description of whippings as the form of cruelty. Now, the reason that I'm pointing this out is because we kind of, the way that we've experienced slave narratives, it has come from this genre of storytelling, of memoir. And so there were many other cruelties on plantations, right? Not just whippings. Like some plantations didn't incorporate whipping. Some plantations, it was iron fetters or it was beatings. But in the way that genre has depicted it, we've come to expect this kind of cruelty from the storytelling, right? Yeah, no.
So did they know of this? Were like, oh, okay, now I need to add
Yes.
one person. I guess this is like a general
Yeah, so like the way that genre usually works is that there will be one extremely successful version of this kind of a story, and everyone will kind of like look to that for what people kind of want to see in the story, you know, and what would be effective. So there were plenty of other slave narratives that don't kind of fall under this genre so strictly, but we look at all the different slave narratives and we see, oh, they all have these kind of commonalities, and people like Frederick Douglass that were writing further along in history. So these start coming out 1790s. Further along in history, they're very aware of the genre characteristics. So they kind of make it fit into those genre characteristics. Yeah. It's not that these things didn't happen. They're true. It's just that he maybe is not talking about other things that happened because he wants to highlight the genre tropes. Yeah.
It's like teen dystopias or like Romeo and Juliet stories.
Yeah, exactly. We have so many genres now, like, so romantic comedies, right? There's plenty of romantic comedies that don't fit all of the tropes, but people know if I'm going to make a very successful romantic comedy, it must have some kind of meet cute at the beginning where they meet in a cute way, right? It must have some sort of like, they like each other at the beginning and then they have a falling out and then they like each other again. And at the end, you have some sort of like hope for a continued romance, usually a marriage. And a really successful rom-com is going to fit all of those. And when you have a rom-com that doesn't, like they break up at the end, everyone is kind of furious because it doesn't fit with those genre characteristics. So this kind of works.
La La Land.
Huh?
La La Land.
Like La La Land, yeah, or 500 Days of Summer. They don't. Spoiler alert, that was upsetting at the end. All right, number 6. It will always have a slave who stands up against the master. And sometimes that's not successful in these stories, but often one of the tropes is that that person who stood up against the master is successful in their rebellion. Number 7, you always have a story about reading and writing, how slaves were refused that ability, but how the writer learned anyway. There will be some sort of discussion of the hypocrisy of Christianity under slavery. And then there will be an account of the capitalism of slavery. So we worked this many hours, we got this in return. And number 10, there will usually be an auction, or there will be some way that it's talking about breaking up families. Okay, so that was a really quick review of what we talked about at the end of class last time. So what I want to discuss now is why. Why would these meet the expectations of a certain audience? So slave narratives we're looking at, they start in 1790, they go up through like 1900, 1910 or so, and we get tons of them. They were very financially successful. Not all of them, but there were a lot that were financially successful. So like Frederick Douglass's, that made him a lot of money. He was able to stop doing physical labor because of this book, and he was able to start touring. There was one called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl that was super successful. 12 Years a Slave was a book that was very successful. There's one that we're going to read part of called like The Interesting Narrative of Ulata Quino, I think. They were all like, people were buying them, like they were bestsellers by the standards of that era. You also have narrative versions of these. So like you have not just memoirs, but Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, that was like the biggest bestseller of the decade. So who is the audience for these stories? White people. Yeah, for sure. These are not stories that are meant for fellow slaves to say, hey, I should point out audience instead of just writing white people on the board, to say like, hey, here's what it's like to be a slave, because they know what it's like to be a slave. Also, there's a bit of difficulty here. If the audience was of fellow, slaves, then the reading and writing barrier wouldn't make much sense to talk about, right? So yes, you've got a white audience primarily. What else could we know about this audience? Yeah.
They're probably like higher class.
Yes.
Since they could be
Richer. Yeah, literacy is not super high in the 1800s. They're going to be people who could afford to go to be educated. Yeah.
One specific audience would be like abolitionists.
Yes.
It won't be Southern plantation owners.
Good. Yes. So because of that, it's not Southerners. It's going to be mostly Northerners, right? Maybe some Southerners who are like, trying to be a little bit more enlightened potentially, right? But for the most part, this is trying to speak to the abolitionist movement in the North. Oh?
Would the audience also be the class abolitionists that already know, like,
Yes. Okay, good. So I like that you are pointing that out. Rich and educated, but maybe ignorant about slavery in particular, because I think they're not necessarily targeting. Oh, thank you. They're not necessarily targeting racists. Like, they're not saying, hey, I know you hate Black people, but this is how bad it is under slavery, and so maybe you shouldn't anymore. They're more targeting people who already have like a certain amount of empathy, or empathy is the wrong word, sympathy and pity, and they're trying to get them to maybe like act. It's more of a jump starting from a point of ignorance rather than a trying to convince somebody to have the completely opposite point of view. Anything else we would know about these people? I think that's a good one. One thing I want to add here is that there's a lot of this genre. I said we were done with them, but that is speaking to people who are already interested in things like transcendentalism. So they're already interested in social progress and how to enact that social progress, and focusing on the individual as somebody who is like worth listening to. And so the reason I do this unit right after transcendentalism is because many of the abolitionists were transcendentalists, and they kind of grew out of that thinking.
Is it because it humanizes specifically like the characters?
Yes, okay, good. So let's like move into how these tropes then are going to affect this audience. And I think it's men and women in this audience, and there are a lot of prominent female abolitionists, partly because of transcendentalism. So why are they going to be moved, or why would they be interested in meeting these tropes? And I think, yeah, it's because it's appealing to like the humanity in everyone. I think that's a big part of that. Precedent?
With transcendentalism, like the self-reliant social world.
Okay, good. So let's look here at the different tropes. Which one of these tropes seem to be like very, or even a couple of these, that seems to be very focused on like showing an ideal of self-reliance? Daniel?
Well, I kind of said it, I think, because they're teaching themselves.
Yes, that's a huge issue, right? So it's like you recognize the importance of like self-growth, and you were able to do that even when all of the forces of the world were against you doing that. Elarose?
The selective parentage.
Yeah, tell me why that would work.
Because one, if they didn't have a father, then they grew up like having to be without that, to be independent that way.
Okay, good.
And
So
they would have to be like learning how to work.
stress independence even from like parents, right? And it would stress like they're autodidacts. But you guys know that word?
What?
Well, cool. You're gonna learn a new word. Autodidacticism means self-taught. So there it's emphasizing this idea that they're self-taught. Any of these other ones that would be good for self-reliance, Noble?
I would say like 6 possibly. would
Yes.
Stand out for like, that means that they stood up for themselves, so they kind of followed their.
Yes, absolutely. So to stress this idea of like rebellion and rewarded rebellion, I think is really important for them. Okay, tell me about this one. How is this going to be something that appeals, or I mean, not in the way that they're like good for you for doing something, not appealing to them in the way that like you're appeasing them, but why would that be something that this audience would react to? Iris?
Well, I feel like the audience would be like Christians, and so having like a sort of relation to the characters makes them like humanizes them, and it makes them want to root for them more because they're a part of a group that they are also.
Okay, cool. So part of the group, and part of these stories is talking about how it's often like the most Christian slave owners that are the cruelest. So I also think it's pointing out the weaknesses of the group. Precedent.
Okay, wait, so that's why Christianity is,
Yes.
so maybe back to the transcendentalists too, who don't really like religion and that are more, like, scientific, not logical, maybe? I
Right.
forgot the word. But they're not into religion, right?
Well, they
Not really.
can be.
They can be.
They don't have to be anti-religion, but Emerson is always saying like the point of church is that you get this nice spot to like sort of contemplate things for yourself.
You can believe in God and nothing to do with it all.
Right, they believe in something greater than that. It's not always for all of them like the Christian version of God, but it could be. It's just you have to be a transcendentalist, you have to have some sort of belief in like something greater than yourself that you could transcend to. So I think that applies here, like the group think about Christianity, like the Southern version of Christianity is so hypocritical. And so we up here in the North, we might be able to kind of like fix Christianity by having a more moral take on it. So it's like it gives you a chance to, and you'll see this in Frederick Douglass, it gives the Christian a chance to say, well, that's not my Christianity. Like my Christianity is amazing, right, and good, but their Christianity is bad. They're the hypocrites here. So it kind of like shocks the reader to be like, what are you saying about my religion? But then to like try and imagine ways to fix it. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, it also like it gives them a goal, like a hope to look towards. So like Christianity,
Yeah.
any religion would be like the reason to go on and the reason for fighting.
And I'm putting another goal because the primary goal is abolition and slavery, but it gives them the secondary goal that they can work on immediately too. Yeah,
I feel like it also kind of isolates slave owners from like Christians in the North by
Yes.
saying they are doing this, but it's against your position. So
yeah. Absolutely. And so with that isolation, I think we also need to look at this part of it. So the account of capitalism in slave narratives is like, I work this much, I provide this many, like I pick this many pounds of cotton or tobacco or whatever, and then they give me, and usually it's like pittance, right? Like what they're emphasizing is that it's not a fair exchange. So they'll give me, you know, a pound of corn and that's supposed to last the week, or they'll give me flour and it's full of bugs or whatever. They'll give me a place to sleep, but it's like covered in mold. So why do you think if Christianity like isolates the slave owner and says the Southerners, they are bad, we don't like them, let's fix what's going on in the South, what would an account of capitalism do for our Northern audience? Yeah, no,
Well, the account of capitalism, like the North is like pretty industrialized and they're the ones mostly taking the biggest part in capitalism. and
Yes.
The South is like less developed and industrialized, so it's gonna feel more Northerners.
Okay, yes, and so they're going to see like that there needs to be this fair exchange because they've committed to that system, right? They also participate in that system. So this is a way of making the audience feel guilty for their actions. The Christianity one, if you're like, oh, those Southern people, they're so evil, you're going to get a bunch of Northerners saying like, this is just a Southern problem. But when you look at the capitalism of it, they start to think about, oh, I'm wearing cotton clothing. Oh, I smoke tobacco. Where does my tobacco come from? Oh, it comes from a plantation. I am participating in this form of capitalism. Like I am the reason, I'm one of the reasons that this is happening. And that's a struggle for these stories because they want to show like everyone is to blame without alienating their audience completely.
So it's a social critique.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Okay, and I think we see why, I think we kind of talked about why these two would appeal to our audience as well, right? Okay, cool, so this is kind of like the effects of the genre. All of it then is partly to appeal to pathos. We spent a lot of time talking about how to appeal to logos. Let's move on to talk about how to appeal to pathos. So in your packets, you're gonna find, it's after the stuff we were doing last time, you're gonna find the excerpt from Ulada Equiano. Oh, it's back there. Yeah, no problem. And we're gonna listen to this one. I've got a reading of it. And I'll put up his picture as well. You haven't gotten one yet, right?
No.
Okay, yeah, just keep that one. Okay, Zoe, I'm gonna try and make this work, but if it doesn't, you'll just be playing it on your own.
Hey, I got Sarah for a second.
Okay,
She's having a hard time today, so she's gonna go for a little walk. I'll bring her in, okay?
okay, sounds good. Yeah.
Is it like gonna read the train one,
Or no, the Orient.
No,
Oh,
not
let's do
train,
both.
the bus one.
I like the part.
Blanche with Blanche.
Oh, Streetcar Named Desire. Yes, they are. Why? Oh, I see. Okay, let's see. Sorry, 1 second. I'm trying to make this work with Zoom too. Okay, so this audio comes from an exhibit at the Museum of the Africa Diaspora. So it's meant for a museum exhibit where you walk around looking at pictures and listening to the audio that goes with it, which means that they cut out some of the bits of this excerpt that I gave you to make it shorter. Sorry, where is it? Where are you? There it is. Okay. So this is an excerpt from a book that was published in 1789. First, we're going to listen to the introduction just to the exhibit. This is from Maya Angelou, so we should listen to her. Maya Angelou is a very famous American poet.
The enslavement of the African people, the transatlantic slave trade, and the plantation system that followed initiated the largest sustained commercial trading of human beings in history. Some scholars estimate that more than 20 million Africans were transported to the New World. The few slave narratives that are presented in this exhibit reflect only a fraction of the millions upon millions of stories that could have been told by people who had the misfortune to toil under the yoke of slavery. Although each of their stories is as unique and individual as a fingerprint, describing as they do a different heartbreak and a different survival strategy. The brief glimpse provided in this exhibit will give you an introduction to the ways in which lives were affected by slavery.
Okay, so there's the introduction. Here's Olaudah Equiano. That's what he looked like. That's the portrait that's included at the beginning of the book. Remember what I said about the portraits? Like often they were meant to show a kind of like academic quality to the writer, almost like a way of saying like, you know, this person, yes, he is a Black person. All of you racists that maybe do not think that this person would be capable of writing this book, he obviously is capable. Look at how, you know, dapper he looks, that kind of attitude. So this is, yeah, and there's the little intro to the book. That's what it would have looked like. This is an excerpt from his book. So you found it in your packet, right? It's gonna skip a couple parts, like it's gonna skip a large part of the third paragraph and then a part of the middle paragraph. So just follow along as best as you can. And while you're listening to it, he speaks very slowly. So you will get a chance to kind of think about how he is appealing to that audience that we talked about before. In this case, the audience is British. He was a British guy, so it's a little bit different, but so not transcendentalist, but it's still going to be rich white abolitionists trying to get rid of slavery, so trying to ban the slave trade. She's going to introduce him first. Where is it? Oh, there.
Olaudah Equiano was born in 1745 in what is today Nigeria. As a young boy, he and his sister were kidnapped gagged, tied, and taken from their home. During his life as a slave, Edwiano was sold 10 times and underwent 3 name changes. The following passage was taken from his autobiography.
The first objects which saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast were the sea and the slave ship, which was then riding at anchor and awaiting its cargo. These filled me with astonishment, which was soon converted into terror when I was carried on board. I was immediately handled and tossed up to see if I was sound by some of the crew. And I was now persuaded that I had gotten into a world of bad spirits and that they were going to kill me. Their complexions different so much from ours. Their long hair, the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm me in this belief, as well as the multitude of black people of every description chained together. Every one of their countenances expressing dejection, sorrow. No longer doubted my faith, and quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the deck and fainted. When I recovered a little, I found some black people about me, who I believe were some of those who brought me on board. They were receiving their pay. I now saw myself deprived of all chance of returning to my native country, or even the least glimpse of hope of gaining its shore. But I was not long suffered to indulge my grief, for I was soon put down under the decks. There I received such a salutation in my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life. The stench, the closeness of the place, the heat of the climate, the number of us forced to live in those conditions which scarcely room to turn almost suffocated us. I was soon reduced so low that happily for myself it was thought necessary to keep me always on deck. And because of my extreme youth, I was not put in chains. One day, when we had a smooth sea, moderate wind, 2 of my wearied country, who were chained together, preferring death to such a life of misery, jumped into the sea. Immediately, another quite dejected fellow also followed their example. There was such a noise and confusion amongst the white people to go after the slaves. 2 of the wretches were already drowned, but they did get the other, and afterwards flogged him unmercifully, but thus attempting to prefer death to slavery. In this manner, we continued to undergo more hardships than I now can or want to relate. Hardships inseparable from this accursed trade that still causes so many of us to prefer death to slavery. Death to slavery.
Okay. So what I'm gonna have you do is very similar to what you were doing with the logos stuff. So that's why I gave you feedback. I wanted to give that feedback. Think about how I was asking you to kind of dive into the word choices and the actual way that the writer is achieving that effect. So I'm gonna give you one word. And for this, I want you to do it in at least partners again. So if your whole group is gone, let's have you pair up with somebody new. Is your whole group gone? Ben's whole group is gone too, isn't it? Yes, the logo. All right, grab a partner at least. I'll give you 15 seconds to find your partner, and if you don't, then I'll figure out. No shame. Okay, does anyone not have a partner, anyone they're working with yet? Dan, will you just work with Jonah? Zach, you have partner, right? Yeah. Is this who's working together, Jonah and Ben? Okay, perfect. Okay. Here's how this works. Under says, you put a short version of the quotation. I don't need the entire one. I just want you to be able to find it again. So even the first few words of the quotation. Under the does column, you are writing what the effect is. So we're talking about pathos for this one. I want to see that you can identify like a specific emotional effect that it's going to have, a specific way that you think the audience is going to react to it. So how the audience is going to react is the does column. And then the how column is how Lotta Equiano is creating that reaction in the audience. So that's where you are looking at specific words and phrasing and the order of words. So under the how column, I think it's always a really good idea is if you feel like one word is standing out and it's very powerful in this quotation, you are going to look it up in the dictionary, see what the definition actually is, even if you feel like what it is, and see how that definition might add to the feeling of it. You could also think about connotation for that one, common uses for that word and how that's going to add to the emotional impact of it. So how, quote, does, how is it affecting the audience? Says, quote, does, how is it affecting the audience? How is it achieving that effect? There are 4 spaces here, but I only want you to do 3. This is just a form that I use a lot, so you probably, if you had last year, you've seen it. So cross out that bottom one. You don't need to do the last one. And it has a backside, but we are not doing that yet. So just 3 different instances of pathos in the article. And if you, now I lost my train of thought. That's it. We're 3 different instances of pathos. Oh, there we go. If you find something in the section that they just read out loud, you can absolutely use that if you want to. It's just, that was just so that, I wasn't reading it out loud. Okay. Can you work with boys on this? And then let me show you what it was. We got your packet. So we've been talking about slave narratives. Remember at the end of class last night, I was telling you about the things that are in slave narratives. We were talking about like portrait and okay, so all of those different qualities. We actually looked at a slave narrative Mulata as Leon. He was Nigerian and was sold into slavery. And was sold for different masters. And so just never. I don't know, never was able to really have home outside and he eventually he bought back his freedom again.
I think that partly he like the basis in that
He brought back his freedom. And
he says
was convert wrote this book,
astonishment
it was
was
an entire book that was published in and was really influential in stopping there. So we're looking at how we are trying to and we talked about how the audience for these effects, they're usually white men, rich, they're usually already like kind of anti-slavery, but sometimes just not enough. Like, and so a lot of times humor is increasing the audience's emotion so much that they feel like I have to love it now. Does that make sense? Okay. So don't worry about this. I'm just gonna have you read it. It's a lot easier than the one you did yesterday, but it's not, it's still old fashioned, so if you wanna look up for it. But it's just describing what
People like to like to about.
and as you're reading, mark areas where you feel like, oh, this would have a really strong foundation. Yes. Yeah, no problem. Are you just gonna do it digitally? Yeah. Yeah. Totally fine. That sounds great.
Were there transcendentalists in Princeton?
No, but they were Enlightenment people in there. So he's really appealing to those ideas of the Enlightenment. But if you don't know about the Enlightenment, then just think about them being white educated people. Okay, Zoe. Okay, so we've talked about how to analyze pathos, and we've talked about how to analyze logos, and now let's think about how to analyze ethos. So ethos is the author's credibility, where the author is trying to establish their trustworthiness. Like, basically the author is trying to get their audience to believe what they say based on their sort of authority on the subject or their credibility. So I'm going to read this one out loud to you. This is a letter from a man named Benjamin Banneker to Thomas Jefferson. Benjamin Banneker was a freed slave. Let me remember exactly. I'm trying to find my version of this, but I can't find it. He was a free man. I don't think he was ever a slave. Let me double check on that. But he was a free man, and I believe his parents were slaves. And he was writing to Thomas Jefferson as a way of like pointing out Thomas Jefferson's hypocrisy, you're going to see, in fighting for the Revolutionary War, but not fighting for the freedom of slaves. And we're going to read through this, and as I'm reading, you are marking down, you're underlining anywhere where you think he's trying to establish his credibility with Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, I'm going to sit down though. His credibility on this subject. So like, why should Thomas Jefferson trust him to have a correct point of view on this particular subject? Okay. Sir, I am fully sensible of the greatness of that freedom which I take with you on the present occasion, a liberty which seemed to me scarcely allowable when I reflect on that distinguished and dignified station in which you stand, and the almost general prejudice and prepossession which is so prevalent in the world against those of my complexion. Let's pause and just make sure we understand what that's saying. He says, I'm fully sensible of the greatness of the freedom that I'm taking with you. So what is he saying right there? In normal contemporary English. Yeah, Ben.
Is he saying like, I know I'm being bold with you?
Yes, exactly. Like I know I'm being like very bold right now. I know that I am of a race, he says, of a complexion that has been prejudiced before. So for someone to speak to the president of the United States like this is going to be a very bold action to take. Then he says, I suppose it is a truth too well attested to you to need a proof here that we are a race of beings who have long labored under the abuse and censure of the world, that we have long been considered rather as brutish than human and scarcely capable of mental endowments. So what is he addressing right there? Like, why does he include that paragraph? There's mine. Why include this paragraph that says we've been considered brutish rather than human and scarcely capable of mental endowments? Yeah. Okay, so I think it's calling out the stereotypes that people like Thomas Jefferson might have towards the writer. So he's saying, we have long been considered in this way. Sir, I hope I may safely admit, in consequence of that report which hath reached me, that you are a man far less inflexible in sentiments of this nature than many others. So I have heard that you're maybe not as racist as other people, that you are measurably friendly and well disposed towards us, that you are willing and ready to lend your aid and assistance to our relief from those many distresses and numerous calamities to which we are reduced. So, hey, Thomas Jefferson, I heard you were willing to listen to Black people and recognize our needs. Now, sir, if this is founded in truth, so if I've heard correctly, I apprehend you will readily embrace every opportunity to eradicate that train of absurd and false ideas and opinions which so generally prevails with respect to us, and that your sentiments are concurrent with mine, which are that one universal Father hath given being to us all, and that he hath not only made us all of one flesh, but that he hath also, without partially afforded us all the same sensations and endued us all with some faculties, and that however variable we may be in our society or religion, however diversified in situation or color, we are all of the same family and stand in the same relation to him. So I heard you were less racist than other white people, and if so, then you must agree that God made us all the same. Sir, if these are sentiments of which you are fully persuaded, so if you're agreeing with that about God, I hope you cannot but acknowledge that it is the indispensable duty of those who remain for themselves the rights of human nature, maintain for themselves the rights of human nature, and who profess the obligations of Christianity to extend their power and influence to the relief of every part of the human race, from whatever burden or oppression they may unjustly labor under. And this I apprehend a full conviction of the truth and obligation of these principles should lead all to. So if you believe in God, like me, then you must agree that we need to recognize that all people are human beings and we should relieve them of their burdens. Sir, I have long been convinced that if your love for yourselves and for those inestimable laws which preserve to you the rights of human nature was found on sincerity, you could not be solicitous that every individual of whatever rank or distinction might with you equally enjoy the blessings thereof. Neither could you rest satisfied short of the most active diffusion of your exertions in order to their promotions from any state of degradation to which the unjustifiable cruelty and barbarism of men have reduced them. Okay, that's a mouthful. What is he saying in that paragraph? What is his argument? Yeah, Ben?
Does he reference like the Constitution, like the rights that they have, and that
Yes.
everyone should have them, not be cruelly like barbaric?
Exactly. It's like, okay, if you really do love the Constitution, like you say you do, then you will agree that the cruelty and barbarism that is, so like the way that my race has been treated in America is unjustifiable. Sir, I freely and cheerfully acknowledge that I am of the African race, and in that color, which is natural to them of the deepest dye, and it is under a sense of the most profound gratitude to the supreme ruler of the universe that I now confess to you that I am not under that state of tyrannical thraldom and inhuman captivity to which too many of my brethren are doomed. So I'm black, but I'm not a slave. But that I have abundantly tasted of the fruition of those blessings which proceed from that free and unequaled liberty with which you are favored, and which, I hope, you will willingly allow you have received from the immediate hand of that being from which proceedeth every good and perfect gift. So he's kind of saying here, like, you're lucky that you're white. I'm unlucky here that in this country I have been abused, right? And you need to recognize that that has been, like, your position has been a gift from God, and that God wouldn't like that. Sir, suffer me to recall to your mind that time in which the arms and tyranny of the British Crown were exerted with every powerful effort in order to reduce you to a state of servitude. Look back, I entreat you, on the variety of dangers to which you were exposed. Reflect on that time in which every human aid appeared unavailable. What event is he talking about, by the way? The revolution. Yeah. So he's like, hey, remember when you were in a revolutionary war? Remember what that felt like. Reflect on the time in which every human aid appeared unavailable, and in which every hope and fortitude were the aspect of inability to the conflict, and you cannot but be led to a serious and grateful sense of your miraculous and providential preservation. He's really focusing on this idea that that was really good luck that you won the Revolutionary War. It's really good luck that you exist in a country that privileges your race. That's good luck. That's not anything you've done. You haven't earned that. It's good luck. You cannot but acknowledge that the present freedom and tranquility which you enjoy, you have mercifully received, and that it is the peculiar blessing of heaven. God let you win the Revolutionary War. This, sir, was a time which you clearly saw into the injustice of a state of slavery. And in that, he's talking about how they felt like they were in a state of slavery under Britain. But he uses that word slavery. And in which you had just apprehensions of the horrors of its condition. It was now, sir, that your abhorrence, hatred thereof, was so excited, that you publicly held forth this true and valuable doctrine, which is worthy to be recorded and remembered in all succeeding ages. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who wrote those lines? He says. What? Thomas Jefferson, yeah. So he's quoting the lines back to him. He's saying, hey, remember when you wrote this? Do you still believe it? All right, here, sir, was a time in which your tender feelings for yourselves, that's a really good dig at them, when you felt like sorry for yourselves, and that engaged you thus to declare you were then impressed with proper ideas of the great valuation of liberty and the free possessions of those blessings to which you were entitled by nature. So basically he's saying there, you recognized that Britain was mistreating you. You felt like it was like existing under slavery. And so you wrote these words of the Constitution that says, like, we have these liberties because you felt so sorry for yourself, and you recognized that that wasn't a great way to live. So here comes a little shift here. But sir, how pitiable is it to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution to those rights and privileges which he had conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies in detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act which you most professedly detested in others with respect to yourselves. So what's he saying in that line? That's kind of his thesis statement. You're hypocrites. Yeah, exactly. You pretended that you cared about this thing, and yet here you have counteracted God's mercies. So basically, like, defied God by keeping people in slavery that you yourselves were so worried about being a part of. Sir, I suppose that your knowledge of the situation of my brethren is too extensive to need a recital here. I know that you know how bad slavery is. That's what he's saying. Like, I don't need to repeat to you how bad slavery is. You know. And I think that's a real dig at Jefferson, because Jefferson was not, he was a slave owner and not a great one. So, I mean, great. Like there's like there's a, examples of great slave owners. Sorry, I'm being recorded here and now I'm gonna get canceled. What I meant to say is like, he was not he was one of the, not the worst. He was cruel though. There we go. There we go. He's on the bad end of the spectrum. Yeah. So he's like, you don't need me to recite how bad slavery is. And it's kind of this like, only because you do it. Neither shall I presume to prescribe methods by which they may be relieved. Otherwise than by recommending to you and all others to wean yourself from those narrow prejudices which you have imbibed with respect to them. And as Job proposed to his friends, put your souls in their souls' stead. Hey, maybe empathize with them. See what it would feel like to be a slave. Thus shall your hearts be enlarged with kindness and benevolence towards them. And thus shall you need neither the direction of myself or others in what manner to proceed herein. He doesn't even say like, here's what you need to do about slavery. He says, I'm not going to tell you. All you need to do is actually feel like what it would feel like to be a slave. And then you will know what to do. And now, sir, although my sympathy and affection for my brethren hath caused my enlargement thus far, I ardently hope that your candor and generosity will plead with you in my behalf, when I make known to you that it was not originally my design, but that having taken up my pen in order to direct to you as a present a copy of an almanac which I have calculated for the succeeding year, I was unexpectedly and unavoidably led thereto. He gifts him an almanac. I don't really know what that's all about, but he gave him an almanac. This calculation, sir, is the production of my arduous study in this my advanced stage of life, for having long had unbounded desires to become acquainted with the secrets of nature. I have had to gratify my curiosity herein through my own assiduous application to astronomical study, in which I need not to recount to you the many difficulties and disadvantages with which I have had to encounter. I think part of what it is so Benjamin Banneker had many different professions. He was a genius. He was honestly like, if he had lived today, we would all know who he was. He was an astronomer, he was a writer, he was a mathematician. He had like all of these different jobs. So I think what he's doing here is to be like, hey, I'm a smart person. Look at my work, kind of. What were you gonna say, Noble?
I was just saying kind of that, but also like I think that he's kind of like, it's not just me, like we all have stuff that we like to do, and like we're not stupid.
Yes.
We have like knowledge and we want to like be better, like look at life.
Yes, absolutely. Kind of like some of these qualities of the slave narrative, to say like your prejudices about like our capabilities are wrong. Yeah. And it says, although I had almost declined to make my calculation for the ensuing year in consequence of that time which I had allotted, therefore being taken up at the federal territory by the request of Mr. Andrew Ellicott, kind of like I'm in high demand. Yet finding myself under several engagements to printers of this state, to whom I had communicated my design on my return to my place of residence, I industriously applied myself thereto, which I hope I have accomplished with correctness and accuracy, a copy of which I have taken the liberty to direct to you, and which I humbly request you will favorably receive. Although you may have the opportunity of pursuing it after its publication, yet I chose to send it to you in manuscript previous thereto, that you might not only have an earlier inspection of that, but you might also view it in my own handwriting. And now, sire, I shall conclude and subscribe myself with the most profound respect, your most obedient, humble servant, B. Banneker. That's the letter he sent to Thomas Jefferson, this genius who dares to call Jefferson a hypocrite in the letter. Like if you thought like you're the one who's representative of all these values that we hold as Americans, and yet here you are, a slave owner from the South fighting to keep slavery around. But somehow he manages to do that in a way that Jefferson is not furious about. Let me read you Jefferson's response. Yeah. He says, sir, I thank you sincerely for your letter of the 19th instant and for the almanac it contained. Nobody wishes more than I do to see such proofs as you exhibit, that nature has given to our Black brethren talents equal to those of other colors of men. That's what Noble was talking about. And that the appearance of a want of them is owing only to the degraded condition of their existence. The only reason that we have these prejudices about Black people is because they have been discriminated against and kept in slavery, both in Africa and America. I can add with truth that no one wishes more ardently to see a good system commenced for raising the condition both of their body and mind to what it ought to be, as fast as the imbecility of their present existence and other circumstances which cannot be neglected will admit. I have taken the liberty of sending your almanac to that man in Paris and member of the Philanthropic Society, because I considered it a document to which your whole color had a right for their justification against the doubts which have been entertained in them. I am, with great esteem, sir, your most obedient, humble servant, Thomas Jefferson. So, no, I don't think it's mocking, but he does ignore a huge part of Banneker's letter, right? He's like, yes, I would like to raise all Black people up to a position where they could also do this work in the almanac, right? I'm gonna ignore that stuff you said about my hypocrisy and just say, yes, this is unfortunate condition. Almanac is like a prediction of like weather patterns and growth patterns in crops, right? Some of you guys are farmers. Oh, so there's all different kinds of almanac.
And almanac.
Oh. Okay, I need to do some research about what his almanac was. While I am doing that. So it's just, okay, so an almanac is like a book of history kind of?
It says an annual calendar containing important dates and statistical information,
Okay.
such as astronomical data and tide tables.
Okay, I'm going to look up and see if I can find what his almanac looked like, because it looks like it was donated to museum, so let me find some pictures. In the meantime, flip over your Does House sheet. I'm gonna have you do 2 of these. So I'm gonna have you find 2 instances where you think he is increasing his credibility, his ethos. And you're gonna do it the same way you did before. You're trying to find instances now of ethos, not ethos. Okay, so we're gonna find 2 instances where he's increasing credibility. I'm gonna have you work. Does that work? Okay, cool. So you 3, Sarah is in his experience.
I think that like he kind of wants to sort of really carefully acknowledge that.
The whole paragraph?
I think he's basically
I
saying,
am a back.
like, I definitely know about these things.
Oh, it's cool.
So just right like the very beginning of that paragraph and then the top right? Use it sort of like
Oh, he was also an urban planner.
Planner or planter?
Planner, like planned out cities. Okay, his almanac included weather forecasts, tide tables, so like the tides of the ocean, lunar and solar eclipses, the times of the rising and setting sun and moon, some mild poems, proverbs, and other bits of general information.
That's it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
As an example of ethos? Yes. I will show you a picture of what it looks like. So the how part is same as pathos, where you are looking at the actual language that he uses and saying, this is how he's increasing his credibility through these word choices. Does that make sense? That could be one way to increase credibility, but there can be lots of ways. Like, think about how he manages to call Jefferson a hypocrite without actually offending him, it seems like. I think that would be a way that he increases his credibility, like his trustworthiness. So Thomas Jefferson doesn't just dismiss him.
In this one, Bible
It shows for house. He says he is African American, shows that he was good.
So I'm not seeing where we can see his handwriting, but this is what he looks like. So it had like a wood cut on the front.
Yeah, it's which I have calculated.
Wait, can it be like you're credible, therefore you should be able to understand this? Like,
Yes, think about how if somebody came up to you and started complimenting you, oh, you are so smart, you are so creative, all of that, that increases your credibility in their eyes. It kind of like speaks to our own ego. And so we're just like, oh, I'm gonna trust what you say. Huh? Yeah, because it's kind of flattery to increase your credibility. Yeah.
Third attribute.
May sound intelligent.
So glad you.
Yeah, like, you kind of acknowledge it, like, I'm aware of the way I'm talking, I, like, I'm embracing the way I'm talking, I'm not just like going off on you, and then like, oh, right, stop me. He doesn't, she's like, I know what I'm doing.
I don't think he's trying to be passive aggressive by saying sir.
He's like, oh, sir.
I mean,
Sir.
I also have, that's just how I.
Please.
No, I think it would be far more respectful in 1795. Oh, 1791, sorry.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Went to medical school. I went to school longer than most doctors, so. Oh. There we go. Yeah, I'm not complaining. Yeah, I did when I first went into college, I thought I wanted to be a doctor.
And then it said you realized.
Then I realized that chemistry was too hard, so I stopped. PhDs were called doctors before medical doctors.
Or they call it healer people.
They were called barbers / surgeons.
Yes, we'll cut your hair, we'll follow you.
You know how they increased the credibility of med school was they made getting into med school super, super difficult. that became really difficult with becoming a doctor. More of a, like around turn of the century, it became more of a like impressive like phrase that you need to see. But before that, it was kind of just like the next few things. It was apprenticeship. If I wanted to, I'd have to start from the beginning, so I'd have to do like all the professional classes. All right, how'd it go? Did you get through the two? Almost? All right, I'm gonna have you turn that in. I'll give you some feedback on that. So, let's just do that on your way out. You'll turn it in. This box. For next time, you're going to start the membership list out. So these aren't your copies. Was anyone not here last time in these ones? So Jonah, I'll get you one right after class, okay? There is at the beginning a preface and a letter, and I want you to read those because these are sort of the testimonials from prominent white people at the time, right? So I want you to read how that is written, and then you're reading the first two chapters, which is only to page 9. So it's that much reading, right? And I want you to annotate that these aren't your copies. You can't write inside these. So use sticky notes or use a separate sheet of paper for your. Yes, ma'am. No, it's not due Friday, it's due Tuesday. Friday, you never have homework. Yeah, just reading some of this. And when you annotate something that's long like this, because you're gonna be annotating this whole book, you're just aiming for a few notes per page. So let me just see that you're reading.
What's your late policy again?
70%. Yep. Until the end of the month, which is tomorrow at midnight.
So that doesn't count for corrections, right?
Then it's nothing.
Like corrections, you just get full points if you do it right. Like if you turned it in all the time the first time. Like rewriting an essay.
Oh, right. Sorry, I brain dead. Hi, Jonah. Let's get this to you.
It's not for the essay that we're doing today, right?
Right. No, you have till October 8th for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.